Hey, have you ever been confused by somebody on Instagram or somewhere trying to show you that the basic math that you learn is violated? Like they showed you 2 plus 1 equals 5? Really? I mean, look here. 5 is 4 plus 1. 4 plus 1, for 1, I write it as a square root of 1. And then square root of 1, this 1 under a square root, I write it as negative 1 times negative 1. And then, square root AB is the square root A times the square root B. So I separate it. And based on complex numbers, you know that the square root of negative 1 is I. So here I replaced it. So it is going to be 4 plus I squared. And you know that I squared is negative 1. So I plugged it back. So you get 3. And 3 is 2 plus 1. So there we go. I showed you that 2 plus 1 is 5. You see, no place I made a simple mistake. 2 plus 1 is 5. Really? Yeah, here is the only thing that happens, the only place that is a mistake is going from here to here. This is the only part that is wrong. The rest of it is all good. And that is because the person trying to basically pretend that they don't know complex numbers, or maybe they don't know complex numbers. So if you have any polynomial like p of z, and the roots of this polynomial are like z1, z2 all the way, you have to write it as z minus z1 times z minus z2 all the way to z minus zn. Okay? You cannot simply just show one of the roots all the time. You cannot write it as z minus z1 times z minus z1 times z minus z1 all the way. You cannot do that. When you decompose a complex number term, you have to write it based on all of the roots, product of all of the roots, not just one of them. The matter of fact is the square root of negative 1 is both positive I and negative I. So if you want to write negative 1, okay, in this case, the first square root of negative 1 is I. The second one, it has to be negative I. Okay, you cannot repeat the same thing. Because if you have this polynomial z squared plus 1, how would you decompose it based on complex numbers? Do you write it as z minus I times z minus I? Clearly not. This is not equal to z squared plus 1. You write it as what? You write it as z minus I times z plus I. That is how we get z squared plus 1. So you see, you have to use both of the roots. And here you didn't. Here you repeated I twice instead of one of them be positive I and this other one be negative I. Now this is going to be negative I squared, and negative I squared is positive 1. So you get back to the same 5, not to 3. Okay, so that is only coming from lack of knowledge in complex numbers, or at least pretending to do so. Otherwise, the laws of math are not simply violated. Hey, have you ever been confused by somebody on the social media saying that they have violated the basic laws of math, like they show 2 plus 1 equals 5? Well, here is one of them. So 5 equals 4 plus 1. Instead of 1, you write the square root of 1. And instead of 1 under the square root, you write it as negative 1 times negative 1, correct? That is 1. And then, square root of AB equals square root A square root B. So here you separated this component into these two separate square roots. And based on complex numbers, that square root of negative 1 is I. So here, for each one of them, you have 1 I. And so it's 4 plus I times I, or I squared. And I squared, just based on here, I squared is what? Is negative 1. So I write it back, and that is equal to 3. And 3 is 2 plus 1. There we go. Look here. 2 plus 1 equals 5. I violated everything that you learned in school, right? Well, this only happens because of one misstep, and that is right here in the middle. Everything else is all good, except here in the middle, you have this portion here. Okay, this is the portion that should not happen if you know complex numbers. So, for instance, if you have z squared plus 1 and you want to decompose it into two linear terms, what would you write? Do you write it as z minus I times z minus I? No, you cannot do that. If you have any polynomial, you have to write it as basically z minus individual roots multiplied together. So one of them is minus I, one of them is positive I, because the square root of -1 has two roots. One is I, the other one is negative I. So you have to write it like this. And here you are making the same mistake. You are writing square root of -1, okay, squared. One time you write it I, instead of next time you write it as negative I, again you write it as positive I. Okay, that is your mistake. Everything else is good. If you have used both of the roots and you wrote first one as I, the next one is negative I, you would get negative I squared, and negative I squared is positive 1, right? So you would get what? You would get back to the 5, not to the 3. So that is only because that person pretended to not know complex numbers or actually really didn't know it. Otherwise, your math laws are all good. Hopefully you enjoyed.